Okay, so in this chapter, this is chapter 14, it's the chapter that discusses oral presentation. So this chapter is certainly available in the book, the Ewald book that I assume many of you have purchased, or you have the online version, the soft version. So it's highly, highly recommended that you read it. It will give you tips on how to be a good presenter. Don't forget, in life, you will do a lot of presentation as an engineer. You will present. This is part of becoming a professional engineer. You will end up requiring to explain your technical work that you've done in a presentation format, in an oral discussion or a presentation format. So this is a very useful skill. Turns out that, like I told you perhaps in class before that engineers are very lousy presenters. They're not the best at presenting. They're very good technically. They know how to do a lot of great analytical work, so they do mathematical analysis and so on. They're very skilled with simulations. They are extremely good at writing codes. They could do a lot of prototyping. They could do a lot of in-field measurements. But as soon as it comes to presenting their work to an audience or to their boss or to whomever the case might be, the audience might be, they are quite lousy. They cannot do a good job. You go there and then it's just the presentation is so bad you want to fall asleep, or you want to just leave out and go to the coffee place and talk to your friends outside. They're not the best. So one way to improve is to really take this part seriously. This is a skill that will be very important for you. It will help you when you want to get a promotion. It will help you to get a job. It will help you in different areas. So I strongly recommend that you pay attention to this part, and then you try to capture some key ideas. Becoming a good presenter will require a lot of, it's not going to happen right away, right? I think I've told you many times that I personally am an extremely shy person, and doing presentations in public did not come easy for me. But I had to do this for many, many years. I've taught many courses. I've gave a lot of lectures around the world. So it kind of helped me to improve myself. So it comes in with practice. The more you do it, the better you'll be. All right. It's like going to the gym. The more you exercise and the more you lift weight, the bigger the muscles you get, the more strength you have, the more the more resilient you'll be, the stronger you'll be, and so on. So it really comes with practice. The same thing applies to oral presentation. And we'll go through some of the key ideas that you could perhaps capture and take with you as you move on with life as future engineers, technicians, technologists. Okay, on to the next slide. Okay, so this is an interesting slide. So this is an image that I found somewhere online, and it's a statistics that comes from our neighbors down south from the U.S. So the statistics tells us this: 74% of people suffer from speech anxiety. So speech anxiety has a name. It's referred to as glossophobia. So I don't know if you've heard this term before, but now you know what it means. Glossophobia, if you hear about it, is the fear of public speaking. So there's a lot of people that in public, in the general public, that as soon as they know they have to give a public talk, then they become highly anxious. They start sweating, and they're not comfortable looking at their audience. If they're presenting, they will totally be looking at their slides and ignoring the audience. They might be looking at the ceiling, looking at their shoes, looking at the door, trying to escape from the lecture, but they're not there. They're not comfortable, and you'll see it. It's very, very obvious. Now, us as audience looking at a presenter that is not doing quite well it makes us not feel so comfortable as well, right? We want the presenter to succeed. There's nobody in the audience that wants the presenter to fail. That's not why we're there, right? We all generally speaking, the audience is always encouraging of the presenter, and therefore you'll see it sometimes when a person is presenting, the audience will usually nod their head just to say that we're acknowledging what you're saying and we're with you. So they nod their head. And because we want the person talking to succeed and to do well. So this is an interesting statistics. So if you feel that you have the fear of public speaking, you're not alone. the majority of people in North America, and I would assume in different parts of the world as well, they have the fear of public speaking. You'll be good at it with more practice. Right. Also, it's interesting to notice that this doesn't vary because a person is a female or a male. The statistics is more or less the same. 73, 75%. It's pretty much the same, right? So it has nothing to do with the sexes of people. So it's generally the same. 70. So on average, 74% of people have this anxiety. Okay. So, how to improve? Well, to practice. Like I talked about myself earlier on the previous slide, I had much fear of public speaking, but it became better with practice and by doing it a lot. Okay, so we'll see what are the tricks to improve and to become good at public speaking. Again, there is no magic here. Like I cannot give you a solution that will make you a superstar. It will not make you a Steve Jobs or a Barack Obama right away. Right? You'll need to practice. These people, the people that have high charisma, like Steve Jobs or generally CEOs of companies, leaders in an organization. These are people with high charisma, right? People that have the charisma, that have the character to talk. Generally, they are very good public speakers. So don't expect to become like them right away. It will take time. But certainly there are tricks and there are tips that you could focus on, and this is what this lecture is all about. Okay, so in here we will discuss the outline for this chapter. So number one, we'll talk about why do we have to give presentations, right? So what's the reason for that? I think that's kind of understandable, but we'll try to nuance that. The planning of a presentation. So everything that we do in life requires some planning. The same thing applies when you do a presentation. How do you plan your presentation? Where do you begin? How do you proceed? What do you do in order to do this? So it's a step by step. Step one, step two, step three. It doesn't mean you have to do this every time, but these are the recommendations that we try to give you here, and they come also from the book. Number three, we will discuss on making speech notes. Now, I have to admit, I am not a big fan of speech notes. I don't think they are very effective in giving a good public speaking, and actually performing and doing a good presentation. Because if you have speech notes, what ends up happening is that people will look at their speech notes and they will avoid looking at the audience. And you don't want to do that, right? You want to be in a room where the audience feels that you are in a conversation with them. Right? So you're in a room, there's maybe, 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, 250 people, I don't know, the case might be, 1,000 people. And, the audience, they want to feel as though you're talking to them. So if you have speech notes, it's not very approachable, right? It seems like you're looking at your notes and you're not looking at the audience, you're not connecting with the audience. So I don't recommend it, but we'll go through it because it's in the book. Practicing the presentation, very important, extremely important. When you see a presentation and the person presents properly, you could right away realize that this person practiced, right? So practicing is very important. Overcoming stage fright and answering questions. Well, how do you do that? How do you avoid being too afraid when you're presenting? What are the methods for answering questions? These are the key things to remember. And we also want to discuss designing graphics. So when you present, it is not a bad idea to also have some graphics, right? You want to have some images. Don't forget the ruler of France, Napoleon de Bonaparte. He said, an image is worth 1,000 words. So instead of sitting down and writing 1,000 words to describe something, you could just show a picture of it. Now, he said it, and it's in fact quite accurate. So it's not a bad idea to also include some graphics in addition to words. Not too much words, not too much graphics, but you need to find a good balance. So we'll talk about these things. Okay, so why give presentations? Well, what do you think? I mean, number one, because you have to. So let's say, I don't know, you're working on some work and you're sitting with your colleagues and the boss asks every person to come in and then to update everybody else on the work that you're doing at the company. So you have to, right? Your boss asks you to do a presentation, you have to present. You write a scientific paper, you travel, you go and you want to share the knowledge that you have, you generated this scientific paper, and you have to somehow present it. You are in a different setting and you want to update, business partners, stakeholders, people from the public and private sector, and you come up with slides and then you present to them. You have to. Right. So sometimes you're presenting and you just present by simply just talking, right? So you give a presentation, you just go to the front of the room and then you just talk to the audience. You just talk just like that. You don't have any other tools to help give your presentation. In other words, you don't have a PowerPoint presentation. You're just talking to them. That's one way of presenting. Other times you're presenting with slides. So it depends on the case, but in the end you have to. There's no two way about it. You have to. And I could assure you, as engineers, as technicians, as technologists, you will end up giving presentation. No question about it. Whether at Sheridan, as you move along in the courses that you have at Sheridan, or when you move on to university, or when you move on to a company. Right, you will end up giving presentation. So it's not a bad idea to start kind of practicing in improving this tool that you could eventually add to your toolkit of skills, in addition to all the technical stuff that you're acquiring here at Sheridan. Now, why give presentation? It is the best way to give an overview of an idea, proposal, or technology. So, you perhaps might have written the work that you're doing in a written format, and that's fine. We want the written format. It is very important to have things in a written format, your result in a written format, your report in a written format. But at the end of the day, this written document is a dry document. It is not it's not somebody that is giving you the information. You want to hear the voice of the person or the people involved in the writing this document. You want them to actually explain it to you. When they give the explanation, you look at them, you look at how they behave, they sometimes add more information. They add a third dimension, right? You could think of a written document as a 2D, as a two-dimensional element, whereas when you give a talk of something that is written, it adds a third dimension to what you're doing. So it adds more information, right? More information. So it's usually much more, it has higher impact to listen to somebody give a talk as opposed to taking the document that the person did and then reading it. And that's why even in the scientific field, when we write a scientific paper, I do that all the time. Some of my colleagues do this all the time. We write a paper and then we end up traveling, going somewhere around the world and giving a talk on the research that we've done. So why do we do that? Why do we have to spend time going on the other side of the planet and then preparing slides and wasting money to travel and so on? It's because it has a serious impact when you actually go to a space and you give a presentation to people, as opposed to telling people, well, go ahead, there's a paper, go read it. So giving a presentation is much, it gives a more value to your work. Now, this doesn't mean that all presenters are good. And this is where some presenters are really bad. And sometimes you ask yourself, well, why did they waste so much money coming here to present their paper? And to do that, they pretty much did not do a good job presenting. So sometimes it's not good if the presenter is not good, is not prepared, did not practice, and so on. But if you have a strong presenter, it's very valuable, it is very enriching, and it opens the door for collaboration and for future work with other international people. So it's always good. Now, why give presentation? It has more impact, right? Like I said, more impact. It's more personal, so it feels as though you're talking to me. instead of just me picking up a paper and reading it. It's more personal. It's persuasive, so you're able to persuade people. It's memorable than a report, right? People will remember the presenter. I could tell you, if somebody wrote an amazing paper or an amazing technical report, but they did a very lousy job at presenting it, it will not be reflected positively on their work. Right? And at the same time, if somebody did a lousy writing but was an amazing presenter, that's also not good. You want to have a good balance of writing a good report and be a good presenter. And that's where the magic is, right? So if you could find somebody that is able to do both very good, then, you found, a really, really good person here, somebody that is highly valuable to the organization. So this is where you want to be. This is where you want to be at. You want to be an excellent writer, somebody that is able to put their ideas in a coherent way in a written text, and somebody that is very skilled at presenting this text that they've written to an audience. Why give presentation? Another answer is that it is the best way to build a connection with an audience, right? So you connect with an audience when you actually talk to them. And you talk to them. You're talking, they're not talking. You're talking, you're presenting. But it also opens the door for Q&A, for questions and answers. So it builds a connection, which is very important. It is considered a test of your competence, right? So as an engineer, you need to project confidence. It's very important. Right? Usually when we go to engineering school, technology school, technician schools, people focus highly on technical skills. And that's very important, no question about it. You need to have these technical skills. But you also need to have these soft skills of writing and presenting. So you need to be competent. It gives you confidence. And it shows that you're a professional person. It shows a degree of professionalism and leadership ability. Right? People look at people that have leadership skills, leadership abilities. So these are very important skills that you want to have as you move on. And this is very important for you, for your own career, as you progress in a company or in an organization. Okay, so in here, what we want to discuss on this slide is the planning of the presentation. So how do you begin the planning? This is, if you think about this slide, essentially, it's very common sense. But nonetheless, it's not a bad idea to actually nuance it, to actually show and explain to you how this is done. So let's go through the motions. Number one, figure out the purpose, figure out your purpose and your audience. Remember when we talked about writing the report, we said you need to understand your target, right? And then the report has to be written for the target audience. The same thing applies here. When you are presenting, you need to ask yourself, who's in my audience? Who's in my audience? Which level of how should I craft the presentation and the slides so that my audience will remain with me? They won't be lost. They won't be looking at their phone. They won't be, outside talking to their friends while eating a donut and a coffee. They are in the room listening to the presentation. So how do you do that? You need to relate to the audience. You need to know your audience. Last year at Sheridan, we had the IEEE 5G Summit. So I was the chair of that summit, and we had this conference at Sheridan, and we had a bunch of speakers. We have a guy from Bell, another presenter from TELUS, from University of Toronto, Carleton University, and others. So we had a bunch of speakers that came in, that we invited them to Sheridan to give a talk. We had roughly 120 people that showed up to that conference. It was highly successful. And one of the speakers, he emailed me. He said, who's going to be in the audience? I need to make sure that my presentation on 5G communications is appropriate to the level to the knowledge that is in the room. So I told him, in the room you'll have students, you'll have Ph.D. students, you'll have undergraduate students, you'll have college students, you'll have professors, you'll have researchers, you'll have people from companies. So it's a varying audience. It's not an audience that is uniform. So he had to tailor the presentation in such a way that it hits. It's interesting to all of the audiences. There is a common denominator. Not too basic, a bit basic, but not too basic, and not too advanced. So somewhere in between. So the question was to really figure out the audience and to fine tune the presentation accordingly. I remember when I was in Europe, I used to live and work in Sweden, and I would be invited to give talks to young high school students, right? To young high school students in schools, Swedish schools over there. They speak English, and I would do the presentation in English. And I'm a guy that teaches at university. I teach wireless communication to masters and PhD students at a university, and so I had to fine tune my presentation of my research and the work that we do to high school students. So I couldn't use the same language, the same slides that I would use when I go to a conference or when I talk to PhD students. It's a completely different level. I had to explain it with more images, with a more relaxed view, with a big picture kind of context. So this is where understanding your audience and fine-tuning your presentation is very important. You have to do the same thing for yourself. So if you need to ask yourself, who's my audience and how do I fine-tune my presentation? Planning for the presentation. The other thing that we need to look into this part is you need to craft persuasive materials and you need to organize them logically, right? So you want the audience to go along with you, right? So you're telling a story. You need to have a story in your presentation. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it has to be organized logically. You have to, we usually use this in my classes, the analogy of building a house. And when you give a talk, it's as though you're building a house. You cannot build the roof before you come up with the foundation and that eventually becomes the basement of a house. You begin from the foundation, then you move on to the walls, you do the windows, and then you do the roof. You can't just jump in right away to the roof. So you have to organize the slide accordingly. One way that I do it when I know I have to do a presentation, whether it's for a conference or for my students, I usually build slides based on ideas that I have that I want to talk to my students. And then, as I practice, I organize. I realize, well, hold on. This slide does not make sense to be on the second one. Perhaps it's more feasible or it's more appropriate to be on the fourth or fifth slides. And then I reorganize the slides accordingly. And you could do that, right? You need to do that. You need to make sure that there is a logical story when you present. Remember that the audience will only remember a few facts and a couple of main ideas. This is very important. Some people, what they do is when they present, they want to show everything that they've done in a report, right? So usually when you present, you're presenting the work that you've done in a report. Some people, what they want to do is they want to put all the text that they have in a report. Don't do that. Don't forget, you are presenting in a very short time, right? You sometimes present for, 20, 25 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, depends on the case. And you want to only hit the key ideas. If somebody is interested by these key ideas, then by all means, they could always go back to the report and read it. But you don't want to put everything. You do not want to overwhelm the audience. You only want to give key ideas. Leave the details of the report. Leave the details for the report. Focus on impressions. So just give the key ideas. If somebody wants to read more, let them go to the report. You could always say, if you're interested, by all means, this is the report. You could download it on this side, or you could access it here, or send me an email and I'll send you the report, or so on and so forth, right? So there's ways to communicate this as well. Okay, so I think we've seen something similar in chapter 6 and in chapter 7. Similar to the writing, right? When you write, or when you write an email, or when you write a report, or when you write an incident report, or a trip report, these different cases that we saw in chapters 6 and 7, you always kind of follow the same structure. You have an introduction, where kind of, you begin. You put the body, you have all the meat of what you want to discuss, and then the conclusion. Well, what are the takeaways of of your presentation? The same thing applies here. The same thing applies when you create slides and when you create a presentation. Whether slides or no slides, right? Sometimes you do like we said, we do the presentation with slides. You have the intro, body, and conclusion. But even if you just talk without slides, you also have the same thing. You should have a beginning, an introduction. You should have the details that you explain in the body. And then you should kind of wrap up what you're saying. Right? There should be some logic to it. So again, this applies whether you have slides or no slides. So let's go into the details here. I'm not going to read everything, but I'll just show you some key ideas. In the introduction, you want to provide essentially an outline of what you want to discuss. Now, sometimes including a slide where you outline what you want to do is fine. It kind of helps in the organization, but sometimes it's also, there's no need for that. You could right away jump in from your cover slide right away to the introduction. You don't need an outline. So it depends on the case. If you have a longer talk, I would recommend having an outline. If you have a shorter talk, you know, I don't necessarily recommend having a dedicated slide with an outline. Right? So you could right away jump into the topic. Now, in the topic, in the introduction, you want to kind of highlight, you want to motivate, you want to motivate what you want to discuss, right? What is the problem that you have? What are you trying to do here? What are the solutions that you're bringing to the table? And that's it. And then you move on to the body. Now, in the body, you give all the details of your work, of your research, of your findings, right? So the facts, the details, the proof, the research, you put it here. And then don't forget, you have to organize it in a logical way. You can't just put it out there and without some organization, but that's where it sits. It's in the middle, between introduction and conclusion. And at the end, you have your conclusion where you kind of summarize the key point. You cannot put everything in a conclusion. You summarize the key point. The conclusion is not the same as an introduction. Remember when we talked in the report, there is something called an abstract. There is something called an introduction. There's something called a conclusion. They are not the same. The same thing in a presentation. There is an introduction where you motivate, you explain the problem, and then you organize the rest of the presentation. And then the conclusion, you just give us the takeaway message. What's the take-home message? In general, you do not want to overwhelm the presenter. The audience. You do not want to overwhelm the audience with a big summary. Your summary should be fairly small, right? Maybe 2 ideas, maybe 3 ideas. Don't go beyond that, right? You say, okay, you sat down, you were nice, you were polite to sit down when I gave the presentation. Thank you for being here. I essentially talked about, I wasted 20 or 25 minutes of your life. And basically, why did I waste 25 minutes of your life? Well, it's because because I wanted you to take the following takeaway messages. Right? I mean, you don't say all this to the audience. I'm just telling you, essentially, you want to kind of, you want to tell the audience that now that you've listened to me, what exactly do I want you to take away from this talk? Because they're going to forget, right? They listen to so many, the audience will listen to so many presentation, they will not remember everything that you presented. You want them to remember 1 or 2 or perhaps 3 key ideas, not beyond that. Right? That's what the conclusion should be. Right? Do not overwhelm the audience with more than that. And that's very important. This is something that people fail all the time with the conclusion. Right? Also, you have to make sure that if you do a presentation, not to include a thank you slide. This is a really bad idea. A lot of people do this, even professors and scientists. You go to these international conferences or local conferences, and they always have a slide where they say thank you. This is terrible, terrible idea. Your last slide should be your takeaway message, not a thank you a slide. You could just say thank you verbally. You just say it. You don't need a slide to say thank you, right? You could just say it there. And then your last slide should be just the summary of what they got from your presentation. So I hope you remember this. Okay, so in here we continue on and let's discuss the introduction. How should your introduction be when you present? So, you know, it is not a bad idea if you start with confidence. You know, sometimes we say use some well-rehearsed opening. At the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to start strong, right? You want to start by grabbing people's attention. Perhaps they're distracted. It's between one session and the other session, and then they're looking at their phone. They're not totally present with the presenters. They're in the room, but they're not necessarily paying attention. So somehow you want to grab their attention. Either you could You could speak relatively well and loud so that everybody can hear you properly. Make sure that all the things related to a presentation are fixed. For instance, you have to make sure that your microphone is well connected so that you don't have to waste people's time as you fix your microphone. You have a clicker in case you need to click to the different slides. It's always better to have a clicker as opposed to being stuck in front of the podium with the machine, so that it gives you the freedom to move. Not sure about different people, the different presenters, they have different views on this. But personally, I don't like to stick behind a podium when I give a public talk. A talk to an audience, especially a technical talk. I like to move. I like to move my hands. I don't like to be behind the podium. In class, usually you find me behind the podium, and that's in class. We don't have a big room, so you'll find me perhaps behind the podium. But when I give an actual technical presentation, I usually move. I move. I interact. I actually look at the audience, and so you want to have that flexibility. At the end of the day, what we want you to do is to grab their attention from the start. So perhaps you could also do this with a joke, right? You could begin with some joke of what happened on that day. Something light, something that is funny, something that is, that could bring a laughter to people, and then you could continue on. Don't forget, keeping the audience entertained is very important. You are talking of a technical subject. You're there to talk about some engineering subject, but you're also, in a sense, a performer. When you're at the front of an audience, you are performing, right? That's the way I see it. You need to keep the audience entertained somehow, not by necessarily being a clown. Nobody said that. So you could be entertaining by making light jokes, something that is light. You could vary your tone. You're not monotone and very sleepy, and if you talk like this, it's very boring. You just want to hide in and then perhaps gradually fall asleep. You want to keep it lively, and you want to keep it energetic. The energy of the presenter will get across to the audience, right? So you want to project high energy when you present, right? You don't want to be a presenter that projects some laziness or fatigue, or somebody that is tired. If you appear tired, if you appear fatigued, if you appear not interested in the subject that you're presenting, it will get across, and people won't pay necessarily too much attention. So you really need to make sure that you achieve this. So here, what do we have? We have tell the audience why they should pay attention. What's in it for them? Yeah, so this essentially is the motivation. You want to motivate or the topic that you want to discuss. So the motivation of the topic is very important. You want to tell the story. Why are you in the room? What's in it for you? How will you benefit? So you want to tell it to them, right? So they're in the room, but you really need to also articulate what's in it for the audience. So you could put that in the introduction. So find an opening that piques the audience curiosity. So for instance, you could catch the attention by saying something surprising or funny, like we said earlier. You could involve the audience by drawing on some common experience. Now, I don't like to begin a presentation where people begin with, "Have you ever wondered why?" I don't like it because, especially because of TED Talks. If you look at TED Talks, which are very valuable, I'm not diminishing the value of TED Talks. I listen to TED Talks sometimes when it's a good presenter, but they always begin with, "Have you ever wondered why?" And it seems very rehearsed, so it seems a bit fake. I don't necessarily enjoy the "Have you ever wondered why?" So I don't like to begin with this terminology. But if you find it useful, you could use it. That's fine. But my personal preference is not too much to use this. Make clear the benefit of listening to the presentation. What's in it for the audience? So again, what's in it for the audience? Here we say, if you notice, we use the word "what's in it for the audience" here, and also what's in it for the audience here. We really want you to hit on this and to make sure that the audience is aware of the benefit for them. Provide an outline for the introduction. This recommendation actually comes in from the book, And look, I also agree that we should have an outline for a presentation. So you have your title page, and right after you have an outline for the presentation. But in reality, if your talk is short, right? So what is short? Short is a presentation that is 5, 10, 15 minutes, even 20 minutes. These are short presentations. They're not long presentations, right? I don't personally find the value of an outline. You could right away begin with a discussion. If you're there for a keynote talk, so a keynote speaker, and a keynote speaker usually talks for 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes even longer than that, then it is not a bad idea to have an outline, right? So it's just it's my preference on how you should when you should include an outline and when you shouldn't include an outline. See it. Okay, so now that you have done your introduction, which generally should be one slide. You have, of course, before the introduction, you should have your cover, your title slide, your main slide, where you have your name, the logo of your organization, and so on, your affiliation. The second slide will be your introduction. If you have a longer presentation, then you will also have an outline, a breakdown of what the slides you will discuss, kind of like a table of content, if you will. And then you have the body of your presentation, and then at the end you have your conclusion. So if you're talking for, let's say, 20 minutes, I would say the body of your talk, the technical slides, will be around 15 slides, right? If we assume that every slide is about 1 minute. This is not a bad rule of thumb. People always consider the 1 minute per slide as a general rule of thumb when you design your slides. It doesn't mean you have to follow this all the time. This is just an average assessment of how long should every slide be. For me personally, I have slides that could be just a few seconds and I click right away. So it doesn't mean every slide will be 1 minute, but in general, this is what it is. In fact, I also have some slides that will take 2 to 3 minutes. So it depends on how dense is your slide or how thin is your slide. But in general, if you assume a 1 minute per slide, you should in general, try to have 15 technical slides, 1 slide for an introduction, 1 slide for a conclusion, and that should cover a 20-minute discussion, not more than that. Sometimes you might need more than that, just in case you need to present a bit more. So that's okay as well. It depends on how you practice. So the more you practice, the more you understand the rhythm and the duration of your talk. One thing that is very important to do when you do a presentation is try to always achieve the time limit that was given to you. Right? So if the organizers of an event tell you that you can present and your budget is 20 minutes, don't go 30 minutes. This will annoy the organizers and it will also annoy the audience. Do not do that. So if you have 20 minutes, achieve your talk in 20 minutes. Don't go beyond that. It is not good if you go beyond that. It doesn't show professionalism. Okay. Now, how do you achieve the budget of the time that was allocated to you? Well, by practicing. The more you practice, the better you will be at giving your presentation in the allocated duration that was given to you. Right. So for us, for instance, with me, for a fact that for your EVB, your last presentation, your budget as a group was originally, what did we say, 20 to 25 minutes. Now you independently, because you're on your own right now, because we're doing the social distancing because of COVID-19, your own component should be 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes. You cannot go beyond 5 minutes to discuss your own solution of EVB. So that's your budget. Okay, so now you have your conclusion. In the conclusion, provide an overview of what you discussed. So this is at the end of your talk. The conclusion basically repeats the most important ideas and facts, right? It's a take-home message. You should have 2 to 3 key ideas that you want the audience to have once they complete listening to your talk. Right? You cannot have them memorize or capture more than 2 to 3 ideas. They don't have the capacity to do that. They are busy people. They listen to many talks. They are always going to different presentations. They do not have the capacity to absorb more than that. So just give them that, and don't assume they know what these 2 to 3 key ideas are. Enumerate it again for them. Tell them that you now sat down. You spent 15-20 minutes listening to me. These are the 3 key ideas that I gave to you. And I hope you take it with you home and you can benefit from it in your future work or in future projects that you might be involved in. Right? So just tell them what it is. Tell them what these 3 key ideas are. These ideas, these key, the summaries and the facts that you're giving to them, the concluding remarks, those one will be the one that will stick in the audience memory. So they will probably forget everything about your presentation a week from now on. They will not forget, perhaps, if you've done a good job, the 2 to 3 ideas that you put at the end in the conclusion. They will hopefully still remember this one. Otherwise, the rest, they will forget everything that you presented. Okay?